Schmeichel.
Aguero! Just staggering!
Just clap in front of your face, please, Paul.
Go. Yeah.
All right, Aaron. You all right?
Count to 20, that'd be great.
Well, it's normally 3, isn't it? 20.
So, let's start at the beginning. You said that all you've ever wanted to do is play football. Tell us where that began. And
Whoever it was, I just loved kicking the ball about.
It is time now to focus on another one of our Premier League Hall of Fame inductees. They all say he's one of the most gifted footballers that they have ever seen, and that made him an 11-time Premier League winner. Paul Scholes.
Obviously, we managed to achieve it a lot of times. I was part of a special team, a special group of players, a special management team. To just play a small part in them 11 titles that I managed to win was a real privilege.
We're sitting back, sitting up.
Okay, yeah, roll. Yeah, go for it. Lovely, thank you.
Okay, right.
so, how do you define greatness?
I would say greatness in the Premier League is a player applying really quite top-level talent to the most important occasions and having a very direct effect on the way the table finishes at the end of a given season. That to me is greatness. It's imposing your talent in a really meaningful way. You almost couldn't have a Hall of Fame without him in the Premier League. We're not just talking about one of the Premier League's most decorated players, but also someone who's gone through so many different incarnations. I mean, and as part of the Premier League's lore in that way, he was one of Manchester United's famous class of '92, a leading member. Some people would say the most talented member.
And now Beckham steps in. Scholes! Oh, yes!
When you mention the best midfielders, I think Paul Scholes' name has to spring to mind in terms of the domination, obviously, in the Premier League for so long, the goals he scored, the goals he created.
It's another stunner for Paul Scholes.
Scholesy was in an era of unbelievable midfield players. He was as good a passer as anyone.
Scholes with a through ball. It's a very good one.
Just the most incredible vision, incredible touch. How many different styles and shapes and ways he could pass a ball and shoot, for that matter. He could bend it both ways. He could smack it straight. He had fearsome shot.
Touched off here, and Scholes!
One of the best players I've ever played against. Hardly said a word on the pitch. Very unassuming, but just a giant of a footballer.
Beckham, lovely cross! Lovely header from Paul Scholes!
At the time, you just think it's normal because, you know, that was the first team I played for, but you ultimately learn that Paul Scholes is a genius with the ball.
Great ball in, and a fabulous goal! Absolutely top draw!
Pure football player, beautiful football player. Scholes, he was just always 1 or 2 steps ahead of everybody else, and that's a gift.
He really is Mr. Dependable. And here he is working, and suddenly it's 2-1.
Mixture of his game was fantastic. Footballing brain, a Mensa footballer.
We're going to have a substitution. Sharp's coming off, and on comes Scholes, who won't be 20 until November, and a big future forecast for him.
I was always a centre forward. Always liked to score. I love scoring goals.
Cantona's in the middle, so too is Scholes. Oh, it's Scholes who scores! His first here this afternoon. He just shows that natural predator instinct of a striker, doesn't he?
The youth team manager Eric Harrison always said you'd be a midfield player. I'd say I doubted it a little bit because I was never the most athletic of people. I never the strongest physically. Fitness always wasn't my strength. Running ability wasn't always my strength. But he saw a role in there, and as the years went on, I went to a number 10, I suppose.
He's such a natural talent in front of goal.
Ability-wise, he could mix his game up. You know, he could play 1 touch, 2 touch. He could dribble the ball at you, put you on your backside. He'd play off both sides as well.
He really is the master of his trade.
The difference between, you know, the good players and the great players is the great players can do it at speed. You know, and the higher up you go in the levels, game gets a lot quicker and more explosive. But Scholes was just pure control. Honestly, it was like he was just leading the orchestra, and playing with him was amazing, because you knew you could give it to Paul Scholes anywhere on the football pitch. The ball was safe, and then more often than not, he knew where the ball was going to go, or he knew what it needed, and he was so unselfish. For such a great player, Paul Scholes was one of the most unselfish players I ever played with.
Lovely ball. Scholes drives it in! What a goal by Paul Scholes!
He'd do the dirty work as well, you know, he'd tackle back. He wasn't the best tackler, but he would tackle back and do his part there.
He'd throw in a wild tackle or two now and again.
He's not good at tackling, we know that.
Probably he did pick up a few yellows at times, but actually his tackling was very good too, in terms of regaining possession too for the teams, which is maybe something forgotten about.
Defensively wasn't my strong part. As I said, I wasn't a great athlete. Physically wasn't strong up against people, but I loved getting in a position in behind the centre forward where I could turn, and then we got the best of it. Hopefully we did, but I'm not 100% sure. And, you know, he brought them to another level, really.
15 minutes into the new era. Mourinho has arrived, and he's arrived in style.
I wouldn't say there was the nastiness of the rivalry that we had with Arsenal, but again, a very good team, a tough team, strong team, physical team. We could also play good football with fantastic players as well. So I'd always go for the Arsenal one as the best one, the most needle in it, and I think having the most needle in it is probably the most aggressive and the most exciting one to be a part of.
So as we all know, you're part of these amazing United squads from the 90s and noughties. So from that perspective, what do you think was the bigger driving force? The joy of winning or the fear of losing?
We obviously live for winning. Whatever it was, whether it was a training match on a Monday morning, whether it was a game on a Wednesday night in a Champions League, or a Premier League game on a Saturday afternoon, we live for winning.
We talked about Man United, we're talking about a team in that era where they were the best team in the world. You know, they had the best players and all over the park.
There's always that fear of losing, of course there is. I think even before any game at Old Trafford, before any game away in the Premier League, there's a fear of losing, of course there is. And that, you know, being at Manchester United, being at such a big football club, losing is a disaster. It can be a disaster, but it's going to happen. Of course it's going to happen. It's then how you react to that, and you know, thankfully over the years we managed to win more than we lost.
Playing in top teams at United there, and as if there's a technical mismatch between our team and theirs, which there was quite often. You had to try and impose yourself on your opposition midfield player. And I would try and get close as I possibly could, trying to, you know, put my foot in and be very aggressive with him. And he would just pop the ball off 1 touch and then move again. And start running in the box behind you, and you have to keep an eye on him. And as soon as you think, well, every time I go close, he just plays that off 1 touch. There's no point me going there anymore. Then he starts dribbling at you. Then he gets momentum and goes past you. But I always felt if he wasn't playing, then you had an advantage because he was so instrumental.
Double calls for celebration before kick-off at Old Trafford. Sir Alex Ferguson is the manager of the month for October, his second such award this season, and Paul Scholes is the player of the month.
Now, I've read that you said Sir Alex Ferguson is the greatest manager of all time. What exactly was it about him that helped you unlock your potential, and what do you think set him apart?
Just the way he was with you, the little bits of tactics, the way he wanted you to play, the way he motivated you. He was always watching you. Even if you didn't think it, you knew he'd be looking at you. If you know even he's not involved in the training session, you know he's watching. You know he's watching body language. Is he okay for Saturday? It would be okay for next week. And it was just the small details of having that right time to speak to you, having that right time to put the arm around the shoulder, having that right time when you've lost a bit of confidence to come and just say, look, just relax, just take it easy. And he could do that. He could also give you a rollicking, as you know, when you needed that. But I just think it was the all-round management of the man which made him special.
So what point do you believe you could play for 20 seasons and score in each of those seasons?
Look, I started as a young centre-forward, but changed into a midfield player that, you know, wanted to score goals, desperate to score goals, always had that centre-forward's instinct in me as a midfield player, and then ended up playing deeper.
He became almost the Premier League's Andrea Pirlo, sitting at the base of Manchester United's midfield, dictating play. And I suppose actually primarily from that period where this great debate arose over Paul Scholes, Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard.
We had a great generation of England players. Pretty much every day in training, Paul Scholes was the best player in training. So whoever team he was on ended up winning, especially when we did the games on small-sided pitches. Because often the game, when you see a game, it's always done obviously on a standard pitch. When you train, we always train in smaller areas, and it's more compact, and you know, and it's way more difficult. But Scholes was always the best at that. So whatever team Paul was on was the winner, and that was when we had the best of the best.
In the modern game, you know, the athleticism of a midfielder is more to the fore. So I think Scholes was at the end of that generation, really, where you could still be a proper footballer and you know, rule a game through the way you pass the ball.
I think it's just how you adjust to your playing style as you get older. It took me a little bit of time to adapt to that, because all I knew was getting in the box and scoring goals. And I felt if I was just staying there, just passing it to this player, to that player, that I wasn't really contributing enough.
A stunning start.
Scholes was amazing in terms of his attitude to just get on with things, dust himself down and be an amazing footballer. You know, when I was a youngster, kind of coming breaking through into the team, you knew when you were on the Scholes' team, if you were making runs out wide, he was going to find you.
Scholes tries to open it up, and what a ball that was.
Absolute radar of a right foot. He didn't really need to use his left foot too often, but he could do when he needed to.
When it comes right down to it, and he could really put it wherever he wanted. I think that's what elevates Scholes more than anything else.
Look at that wonderful ball from Paul Scholes.
We're talking about, you know, really top continental level appreciation of the ball, appreciation of where they put the ball. I mean, we've all heard the stories about how when Manchester United were training and someone like Gary Neville was over by a tree, Paul Scholes had hit them 50 yards. Well, I mean, we saw the effect of that every week.
He's one of them players that come and get the ball off you. He sees many things before other players do. He's like a snooker player. You could just give him the ball, he looked so relaxed, he would never panic. And for me, that made the whole team really relax. And as a defender, you know, you'd know once you give it to him, he'd do the rest, basically.
Finding space would have been a major factor for him, but also was the thing. But Scholes, he could play better under pressure and without the pressure too. He'd find that pass, he'd find the runs that players were making ahead of him.
You realise as you get older, it's all about having control for your team, dictating the pace of play, and giving the ball to the better players. You know, your David Beckhams, your centre-forward, brilliant forward players we had.
And Scholes pulls it back, must be! Push Manchester United ahead!
And you realise you're contributing then, and as long as you're winning games, it didn't really matter.
Here's Scholes trying to turn and setting up Fletcher!
Tell me, what was he like in the dressing room and away from the pitch?
Funny. Scholes is so funny. You know, he's so dry. He has a great sense of humour. No, first of all, he's football first, which I love. But Scholes was just himself. You know, he just come in super relaxed, super chill. thing is, I think all the lads loved being around him, you know, because he was always the same. You know, he wasn't up, he wasn't down. He was always steady, and I think that was one of his greatest strengths.
He was a great character in the dressing room too. He'd be lively when he needed to be as well. And he was just one of them. He'd quite happily just go home and go back to the family and chill out after training. But when it came to match days, whether it be a big Premier League game or a big Champions League night, he was one you could always rely on.
So much on these seconds. Evra, 26, extraordinary!
Towards the end of the third, the first time,
Stolen it for Manchester!
I just didn't feel like I was contributing enough. The manager thought I could do another year, but I didn't. I didn't feel great physically, to be honest with you. After games, it was a real struggle to recover, and I just felt it was the right time to go out on a high, really, and not embarrass yourself on a football pitch. You have to remember, at 36, 37 years of age, you're stopping other players coming through. You know, we have a lot of young players, young midfield players, Tom Cleverley, the likes of him. I want to stop that. But after 6 months, quickly realised that after doing a bit of coaching with Warren Joyce with the under-23s and reserve team, I just ended up training again. I felt fit. The first team had quite a few injuries, struggling a little bit around the Christmas time, and I went to see the manager and look, I didn't know what he was going to say. He could have said anything. He could have just told me to get out of the office. And I went in very early one morning and said I fancy playing again. And within, say, 10-15 minutes, the deal was done. That was it. We were off and running again.
The appearance of a certain Mr. Scholes in the lineup is the first major headline of the day. His return from retirement and straight back into combat in the Premier League.
Top, world class, playing in two different roles. When I was watching him as a kid, he was a box-to-box player, scoring loads of goals, brilliant finisher. And then later on in life, he turned into a quarterback and basically dictated the game from that holding midfield position. So to do that,
I think if you ask the players who he's played against in that position, you know, you could even talk about Iniesta and Xavi, you know, Zidane. When you talk about Scholes, they put him as world class and up there with the best. And you know, when people like that do say that, you understand that, you know, there must be a reason for that.
I can only talk for myself, and I've just put him up there as the best player I've ever played against.
With Paul Scholes, I think his Premier League legacy is that he is one of the greatest midfielders. If you're picking an 11, he'd be a very strong candidate to be sitting in a 2, in a 3, wherever you want to play. Paul Scholes, there's a strong argument he should be there.
It's a dream. It's hard to believe it happened, really, when you look back how lucky I was coming up with 3 or 4, 5, 6 mates, really, playing in the same, at the top level of football you can play in England. You look back, you just wonder how it all happened, but it did, and you know, we all gelled together. We still get on great now. Think of all the other players, not just a class of 92. That's 5 or 6 of us. It's not just about 11 players, it's about 20 players. And to do that over 20 years, to have a different 20, 22 players most of the time.
We'll drop for Scholes. What a goal! Scholes! Manchester United legend, and now Manchester United Premier League centurion.
Another great attribute of the manager to bring that all together. He knew what the squads needed at different times, and I feel very lucky just to be a very small part of that. I suppose when you're a kid growing up, you never think it's possible you're going to play for Manchester United or be a professional footballer. There's so many people that tell you how difficult it's going to be. So, look, if I'd have just played 5, 10 games for Manchester United, I'd have been a proud person. But to go on for 20 years, to have that longevity as well and success along the way, is something that I could have only dreamt of as a kid.
Brilliant. Yep, thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, where's that response?
cheers, guys.
Cool.
Thank you.